This webinar is primarily going to focus on how to prevent separation anxiety from developing and taking into account the very unique situation a lot of us have found ourselves in, being at home now for extended periods of time, working remotely, and in a time of uncertainty. And soon, or if it hasn't already happened for you, some of us are going back to full-time work after our animals and pets have been spending full time with us. So let's get started. What is separation anxiety? It's basically an inability to cope with being left alone at home. The symptoms can range from mild to severe. We'll cover those in a moment. And both dogs and cats can show symptoms of separation anxiety. Mild to severe symptoms of separation anxiety. So following you around the home from room to room and not leaving your side, in particular when you're getting ready to leave home in the mornings, or if you're at home with your dog and your dog is never leaving your side, that's a behavior to take note of. Whining, panting, pacing, drooling, and a general inability to settle when left at home. And settling means lying down and relaxing away from you or in a separate room. Digging, chewing, and destructive behavior, including attempts to escape through doors and windows and crates, which can result in self-injury and harm for the dog. Crates can be a great training tool, but they're not suitable for all dogs. And in some cases, they can exacerbate the anxiety for that dog. Urinating or defecating indoors when you're not at home. So it's important to notice if you would know if your dog is house trained or not. So if it's happening when you're not home, then, and it never happens when you are home, then that's an indication that that could be related to separation anxiety. It is definitely not a form of protest or defiance. Some people think that when they come home and they find something at home that, you know, the dog or was upset, it's nothing to do with that. That is more likely a house training issue or related to separation anxiety. Howling and barking excessively when you are not home. So it's important to know if your dog is very vocal anyway. So if you're home and your dog barks all the time, then, and you go out and your dog barks the same amount of time, then that's not a particularly different type of barking. The barking with separation anxiety will usually be pretty high-pitched and repetitive. And there's also howling, which sounds like crying too. Okay, so how does your dog behave? It's normal for your dog to greet you when you come home and be excited. They want to spend time with you, so they'll want to be close to you. And it's normal for them to bark at noises outside or for any other behaviors that may have been reinforced, like demand barking at meal times or any kind of territorial barking or just play and excitement. The behavior to take note of is if your dog doesn't leave your side at all, even for a minute. So if you want to go to the restroom, your dog is waiting outside the restroom for you. Also, if you've come home and your dog is very showing compulsive behaviors or very clingy, and it can translate into lots of excessive licking, any kind of compulsive behavior and constantly being around you. So the next, this whole webinar is based on how to prevent separation anxiety from happening. And it's also really useful for any new dogs that you might have coming into your home. So I'm going to start with my first tip, which is to create a daily routine for your dog. The routine should include consistent meal times for your dog, and basically for the big events in your dog's day, which include meal times, outside walking, preferably at least twice daily, or if once a day, the mornings is usually better because it helps to set your dog up for the rest of the day. Playtime with a person, and nap times after activity. So regardless of whether you're working remotely and you're at home or you're leaving the home during the day, whatever your own routine is, try to follow the same routine for your dog as best you can so that your dog has some consistency for his or her big events of the day. This then helps your dog be able to predict the day's activities, and it reduces stress for your dog as they know what's expected and they know what to predict. Tip number 2, Make sure to provide enough activity. And that includes providing mental stimulation and physical exercise before leaving your dog alone for an extended period of time. So this could include a walk outdoors for at least 20 minutes with opportunities to explore and sniff for as long as your dog needs to. There's been some recent research that shows that sniffing reduces stress and calms your dog, as well as it is a highly enriching activity. And they can gather all kinds of information from sniffing where other dogs have been. Things like the age of the dog that was there before, the gender, and to some degree, the health of another dog. Also, while you're on the walk with your dog, you could practice some loose leash training using positive reinforcement training methods, so your dog has an enjoyable experience and is relaxed when you return home. You can also practice obedience training and playing with your dog at home or with a toy inside or in the yard. But it's always good to leave the property, to leave your home, because the change of environment is very stimulating for your dog. Do observe your dog's behavior after the physical exercise and activity to determine the type of physical and exercise and activity that works best for your dog and how long is best for your dog. Don't over-exercise or overstimulate your dog, because this can actually have the opposite effect, and it can really rev your dog up and leave your dog in a more challenging position to relax as you leave the home. Basically, a healthy balance of mental stimulation and physical activity is usually more beneficial, such as a combination of obedience training and outdoor walking. My third tip is to always confine your dog to the same safe room or space whenever your dog is left alone. This area should be familiar to your dog, a room or a space that your dog spends time in anyway, and not just when you leave home. If your dog never goes into the area you plan to leave your dog in, and then you leave your dog in that space, that's a big adjustment for your dog on top of being left alone. So in this special area that you have set up for your dog, it could be a room, it can be a confinement area if you have a puppy with an X-pen. But in this space, include your dog's bed with familiar scented bedding and maybe a worn t-shirt from one of the family members. The smell should provide some comfort for your dog. A bed should be the right size for the dog. And there are a number of dog beds that are, I think, currently being advertised as well, that are very cozy and promote calmness. But you basically need a bed that your dog likes. Some dogs like a mat, some dogs like a bed that they climb into. It needs to be the right size for your dog. Also, there should be a variety of rotating new and non-destructible favorite toys that your dog likes. And of course, access to fresh water. Always make sure you remove anything valuable in this area. Make sure your dog can't escape from this area, because if they get out once or twice, they'll be more persistent to escape this area and they could hurt themselves in that process. So it's better to get it right from the beginning. Make sure you get a tall enough X-pen and every angle is secure so your puppy or your dog can't escape. If your dog has access to windows, make sure they're secured, or better yet, don't let them have access to an open window. And if you have a puppy, you need to take even more precautions and just make sure everything is puppy-proofed. You can practice place training to a crate if suitable for your dog, if you're using a crate, or if you have a comfortable bed in this room or area, I recommend being able to instruct your dog to go to this particular space before you leave home. And obedience training using specific exercises is really helpful for this. And then providing audio enrichment, which I'll cover in a moment. Okay, so I'm going to play you a video here. This is one of our puppies from a protective custody case, learning how to go into his crate. The crate's a bit big for him now, but he would grow into it. So I'm going to play that for you.
Yay, good boy! Come. Good boy.
So you might notice that I'm using a really nice tone of voice when I'm interacting with this puppy. And for any dog that you're training to go into a space, especially a crate, the tone of voice is really important. You don't want to use an authoritative tone of voice. You really want to make it either flat or neutral. I'm also using a hand signal. I'm pointing into the crate and I'm pointing out of the crate. The verbal cue, which would be into bed or into your bed, would be the last thing your dog learns. So in this case, at this stage of training, I'm not even asking really the puppy to do that. I'm gentle with the door closing it, so I'm not being quick with how long it stays closed, and I'm feeding the puppy through the crate as well. This space inside the crate, you could practice, if you were doing this with your own dog, you can practice throwing a toy into the crate if you're playing with your dog anyway. And then this would be the area that you provide a stuffed Kong or high value treats and chews if you were training your dog to stay in the crate. Never close the door before you've trained your dog to tolerate those short few seconds at the beginning of having the door shut. And don't push your dog into the crate. Okay. So here's another video, and this is going to show place training. This is just to give you an idea of what it looks like when we're training our pets to do certain behaviors. And in this case, for training your dog to enjoy a particular area and to go to their bed or into their crate. It's called place training. Okay, so we're going to start with the place training exercise and using the lure and reward method. This is basically part of positive reinforcement training. It's a method whereby you have the food reward that your dog likes, you put it into your hand and hide it with your fingers like this, and then you move your hand slowly in the direction of where you want your dog's nose to go. So in this case, I want her to go to the bed. So I'm going to use my hand here, slowly bring it over the bed, and then move it all the way around until I get the position that I want. I know she likes to sit on the bed, so I can wait until she sits before I give her the food reward. Your dog might not even want to step onto the bed, so I'm going to show you what that looks like. So you're going to lure again with the food. You can hold it in a fist if you need to, and then you're going to bring it over to the bed, and if she just stops there, doesn't climb into the bed, then move your hand further away, slowly, and your dog might follow. You might need to keep your hand facing over the bed for a few extra seconds. Once your dog is on the bed, make sure the hand is released and the dog receives the food reward. Okay, so that's just an introduction to place training your dog to a bed. You can choose whatever your verbal cue is, which would be into bed or go to bed, but of course in a nice tone of voice. This video shows just the dog getting into the bed and sitting, and then basically you progress from there to having your dog get into the bed and lay down, and then you can add on a stay exercise as well and build the duration that your dog is on that bed, and then you can add in distractions. Okay, so I mentioned audio enrichment. Audio enrichment is a sound basically that dogs find mentally enriching and soothing. You can provide audio enrichment and create a calm atmosphere for your dog by turning on a calming album of classical music or soft jazz music. You can use an audio book, or you can use the television. What you want to do is make sure you're turning this on just as you're leaving or just before you leave them alone in their safe space. This helps to indicate to them that it's time for relaxing, and it will also help to drown out any sound from outside. There were several research studies performed with dogs in shelters, and the behaviors laying down behavior and resting behavior and a reduction in barking, all of those things were noted once audio enrichment was introduced into the enrichment plan. We have, at the shelters, we have also implemented audio enrichment, and we use Through a Dog's Ear, which is classical music that was composed specifically for dogs. And in one of those studies, they used an audio book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, read by the actor Michael York. And that also proved quite popular. This is to help promote calm behavior, and it works in the shelter environment, and in the home environment. It will also help to indicate to your dog that it's a time for relaxing. Okay, so every time you leave your home, provide your dog with a high-value edible or chewable item on their bed. You could use a stuffed frozen Kong. You could use a no-hide chew. I don't recommend rawhide. No-hide, there are a number of different brands, and it's basically an imitation of rawhide. A bully stick, puzzle game, high-value treats. This is to keep your dog engaged for the first few crucial minutes when you leave home. So this is an incredibly important part of when you're leaving home, when you're leaving your dog alone at home. Ideally, you'll have taught your dog to go into a bed or a crate or onto the mat and give the high-value edible item to your dog there as the reward for going to that place, because then they usually settle down with it, and then they spend a certain amount of time focused on this, and then you can leave. If you haven't yet done the training with going to the bed or into the crate, I suggest obviously not closing the crate door if your dog's not trained to stay in there for very long, but simply place the high-value edible item on the bed. And then this keeps them in that space and helps to prevent them from following you out the door as you leave. What you don't want is to have your dog at the front door and you trying to leave and your dog in that whole space and being separated from you. It's better that they go to their bed, they receive a high-value reward, and ideally something that's going to take some time for them to work through. So what is a high-value edible or chewable item? So the type of thing you're going to leave your dog with depends on what your own individual dog likes. I find the most versatile is a frozen stuffed Kong, because you can fill it with anything you want that your dog likes, your dog's favorite food, and it lasts a really long time. You do need to help your dog learn to enjoy the stuffed frozen Kong, because they don't know, they might give up more quickly if it's rock hard and it's not easy for them to work on. So you would start off with semi-freezing a Kong and make it easy for your dog to empty it, and then basically gradually increase the difficulty. The key is, how long does it keep your dog engaged for? You can also use healthy chews, like a no-hide chew or other edible chews. And there are Himalayan yak sticks. There are all kinds of jerky, chicken, turkey jerky. And I would read the reviews maybe to see what other people have said about these particular treats. And obviously natural ingredients is usually best. If they don't like any of these treats, then using high value, and when I say they don't like any of these chews, I mean you've tried a few different ones, so that you've gone through a list of them to make sure that they don't really like them. Then I would use high value treats hidden in a puzzle game, or at the very least several high value treats left on your dog's bed. High value is going to be different for each dog. All that really means is that this particular food is really of interest to your dog, and your dog can't pay attention to anything else except when they've smelt this particular food and they're following it. So generally speaking, it'll be a food like cooked chicken, cheese, hot dogs, chicken or turkey jerky. Most of those things are considered very high value for a lot of dogs. When you get home, remove the enrichment items and save for the next time. So going back to Kongs, stuffing Kongs, you can fill them with all kinds of different things. You can make a fruity Kong where you have half a banana, some strawberries, maybe a tiny bit of peanut butter. You don't even need to use peanut butter for Kongs, but a lot of people, I think, feel that they have to incorporate peanut butter, but you don't. It all depends on what your dog actually likes. You can also make like a meaty Kong, and for that you would block the end with some dried kibble, fill it with chicken stock or some kind of stock, low sodium, no onion, no garlic, and you can add in a few pieces of meat and cooked carrot, sweet potato, and then freeze it. It's important to note that whatever you choose to use as your high value edible or chew item for your dog, save this only for when you're leaving your dog alone. So don't give this to your dog at any other time. And the purpose of this is so that it remains novel and special, and your dog is excited about it. When leaving your home, use the same phrase to say goodbye or see you soon, and in a relaxed way. And don't provide your dog with excessive attention before you leave home and when you come back. I think a lot of people have heard about this one, and it's important not to be too robotic about it. So when you're coming back, you can acknowledge your dog. You don't have to ignore them like they don't exist, because that can make them more stressed. So just a quick acknowledgement, but then go on about with whatever you're doing as you arrive home. You can practice short departures and longer departures using the same routine and within the home. So this would mean maybe going out to the mailbox or running a short errand. You can leave the room and close the door behind you and go to another room to get something for as little as a few minutes. This will help to start to desensitize your dog to being left alone. If your dog starts to bark, try to wait for a pause in the barking. But hopefully you'll have had some idea of how long your dog can be alone for without starting to bark. For these short departures, there's no greetings are necessary. So when you go to the other room, you come back in the room, you don't need to really acknowledge your dog, because you're trying to teach your dog that, you know, it's no big deal, you've just gone to the other room. Practice obedience training with your dog and use positive reinforcement training methods. Obedience training cues. Positive reinforcement training using verbal cues. So that's into bed or stay. A marker. A marker is basically when you say good boy or good girl or yes, or using a clicker, and it predicts the food that's about to follow or the reward. Hand signals and high value food rewards. These sit and down exercises are important. Into bed or place training, the stay exercise, sit, stay, and down stay, building up a duration, and then eventually settle, which for the advanced version of all of that is go to your bed, lay down, and stay there, basically. Using, and then I've put the dominance theory in there, which basically is just a reminder that dominance theory and aversive training methods is not recommended as part of your training plan. The dominance theory is a means to explain behavior, and train behavior is outdated. And it has been debunked, and it can actually cause aggressive behavior to escalate or even develop in the first place. With regards to obedience training, working on exercises and teaching your dog these cues for as little as 15 minutes a day is all you really need to work on. So you don't need to spend an hour on training. You're really working at your dog's pace and for as long as they're interested. Okay, number 8. Practice teaching your dog a find it game. These are called seeking games, and they ultimately encourage your dog to use his or her nose. This is so that eventually you can hide favorite toys and or food rewards around the house and the area that your dog is being left in. So that could mean hiding it underneath toys, behind a pillow. Your dog would then spend some time trying to locate these items, and that will keep your dog busy and mentally engaged. And it's another tool you can use. Number 9, use available resources if needed. If you're at home right now full-time and you're going back to work full-time, you can use, if you have resources available, you could ask a family member or a friend or a neighbor, professional dog walker or a sitter, to ask them to stop by for at least an hour in the middle of the day. Or the extended alone time that your dog has to basically cope with now, to provide some human companionship, an outdoor walk, or some interactive play. Number 10, don't punish your dog. If you get home and there's a house training accident or something has been destroyed, or you can hear your dog barking, it won't change the behavior. And ultimately, it's going to damage your relationship, it's going to reduce trust, and it's going to exacerbate fear and stress. Instead, use preventative and management techniques by removing valuable items so your dog doesn't have access to them in the first place. Make sure the space that you have your dog in is completely secure. And follow the guidelines, these tips, to help set your dog up so that they can relax. Also, remember, if your dog's in distress, it's not a chosen behavior. And again, it's not to punish the owner because you've left them. These are just human interpretations of canine behavior. Okay, so I hope you found this information helpful, and now we can address any questions that you may have.
I think you had a few questions about crates. So I wonder if we can start maybe more generally and then kind of move, more specifically. So one of the questions it seems like is a crate, do you recommend crate versus keeping a dog in their own room? Or, sort of what are your thoughts on that? If you recommend crate over everything, or what makes the most sense?
You need to have a space for your dog that your dog's comfortable in. So the crate is incredibly useful for a lot of dogs, but you do need to put the time into training your dog to go into the crate. So if you're not using your crate at the moment, you do want to make it a space that your dog goes in for getting chews or high value enrichment and treats, and see how your dog copes with being in the crate. That's an ideal way of having your dog settle and relax.
Wonderful. And I think that actually kind of goes into the other question that was a little bit more specific about crates. So it looks like one of our viewers, Elizabeth, has a dog that was in a crate for 6 hours, but now that they've been home, they've put the crate away, and they want to know, do you think it's better to go back to the crate for an hour or two to help, while they're home, to sort of help with that? What are your recommendations on getting them eased back into the crate?
If they're going to be moving back into to leaving the home and leaving the dog alone, and that's how you left the dog alone before, then you definitely want to reincorporate the crate, and you can do that for a small amount of time each day. I would start with the door open and let your dog reacquaint themselves with the crate, with the bedding. And if you're giving your dog any particular chews or things to work on at the moment, make sure you give it to them in the crate. So definitely start to incorporate, and you could do as little as an hour a day after a walk. So after you've taken your dog for a walk, let them have a nap in there. But I'm not sure if beforehand your dog was crated with the door shut while you were home. So maybe leave the door open to start with.
Okay. And I think, and while we were talking, we got another question about crates and just sort of generally confinement with regard to when you're leaving. So the question is whether your opinion is it better to let the dog have free reign of the house with a doggy door, or is it better for them to have a specific area or crate that they would be in while you're gone?
The doggy door means that the dog can go in and out, and that also means that the dog might spend more time outside barking or digging or getting into trouble that way. It's better to keep your dog indoors when you're not home, because your dog is unsupervised outside, and a lot of behaviors can happen outside because there's no one there to supervise them. So I would recommend having your dog stay indoors, making sure you have some music on or TV or the volume up, a confined space. If your dog is older and is not destructive, you could have them have access to the whole home. Usually having a space like a room is better, but it needs to be a space that your dog has spent time in and enjoys being in that area.
That makes a lot of sense. I think there was an interesting question that I think that we actually didn't talk about in the presentation, and that was one of our viewers has 2 dogs at home. One of them seems to experience separation anxiety in the classical sense, barking, destroying things. The other one, maybe not as much, a little bit mopey when they leave, but not as much of that separation anxiety. So she wanted to know, are there different strategies to managing this when there are 2 dogs at home?
Yes, so firstly, having a companion dog. So if you have a dog that has separation anxiety and you have a second dog, that second dog doesn't necessarily resolve the issue of that first dog feeling anxiety. And if you have 2 dogs, one that is feeling some anxiety and one that is feeling more anxiety, you really need to look at the individuals. It depends on how severe the separation anxiety is, if it's there, or if I don't know if she mentioned or he mentioned if there were any particular symptoms, but you do need to look at each dog individually. So the one that is suffering more, or for both of them, provide additional enrichment and make sure that they're comfortable in that space that you're going to leave them in. And actually too much freedom, so having too much of a space to move around in, can promote more active behavior versus a smaller space where choices are to rest and sleep and lie down and maybe play with the toy briefly, which is what we want them to do. We don't want them pacing and moving around a lot. So yes, there are different strategies depending on the level of anxiety and with multiple dogs.
That also makes a lot of sense. It seems like there's another common theme with regard to the chews and the high value items. So there was two different questions, very similar theme in that, what do I do if my dog doesn't seem to have a high value treat or a favorite toy? Do you have other ideas? And that's something that could be given without them there. Obviously they give him lots of pets and praise when he's at home with them, but they're looking for other ideas.
Okay, so with the toys, the dog doesn't necessarily just like the toy because you present it to them. So the toy is something that you need to play with in an interactive play session. So that would mean finding the type of toy your dog might like. So if you have a small dog, you might get a small fluffy toy. Think about how heavy the toy is if you want your dog to pick up that toy, and make that toy more animated so that it looks interesting for the dog. So just presenting your dog with a toy, and then some dogs will play with a particular toy and that's great, but a lot of dogs will just look at it and leave it. But if you engage with them and you spend 5 minutes playing, then you've started to create some interest in this particular toy. And then if you take that toy and you put it away and you bring it out only when you're playing with your dog, that toy starts to become more high value. With regards to high value edible items to leave, the list is long in terms of what you can leave, and at the very least using a food that your dog likes. So if you're feeding your dog meals and then you're putting all kinds of great things into those meals, and then you're offering that when you're leaving, but it's part of their meal anyway, then it's not really so much high value. So you do need to check different types of food rewards to see if your dog likes a particular food. Eating and playing with toys and enrichment activities require some time to have your dog learn, to like a toy, and also to test out all kinds of different things so that you know what your dog likes.
I think that's really good advice. I wonder, do you have recommendations on where the people who are watching can get some of these things that we talked about? Kongs, the no hide versus a raw hide, and some of the yak or the cheese or whatever it's called. Where could they get some of those things?
Well, we sell them at the Long Beach shelter at the marketplace, which is open. So all of those items are available there, and you can get them online. Again, you want to make sure you get the right size for a dog. So Kong Classic is what those Kongs are called. And they have all different kinds. The black version is the more durable chew. Then they have different colors for puppies. But all of those things that you mentioned, they're all available at the marketplace and then online as well.
Okay. And then I know you mentioned that a lot of times our instinct is to put peanut butter in a Kong for whatever reason. Is there anything to look out for when you're putting peanut butter in a Kong? There's dog safe peanut butter that they should make sure that they're using without, what is it, the xylitol in it?
Xylitol, yeah. You want to stay away from xylitol, and if you are planning to use peanut butter at all, then you would check the ingredients and make sure it just has peanuts in it, not any kind of additives. And as I said, that doesn't even have to be part of what you put into the Kong. You basically want at the opening of the Kong to make it easy for your dog. And usually if it's something like plain yogurt or some kind of a spread like that, or even a banana that you stuff in at the end, and it's semi-frozen, those are all easy things for your dog to get to and are usually high value.
Okay. And then also just still on that same tip in terms of high value, one of our viewers has an older dog. with, sensitive stomach, so you can't do a lot of different kinds of things. She wants to know, would you recommend using a puzzle with her regular food, which she does really like? Is that something that you would recommend leaving the dog with alone, the puzzle?
The puzzle, yeah. So if she was, it depends what kind of dog you have. If you have a lab and your lab has a healthy appetite, whatever your dog likes, if your dog is really interested in that particular food, you could try that. I would always make sure it's just a bit special, so high value. If your dog isn't showing any anxiety at all, then that's fine. If your dog is showing anxiety, then definitely it has to be something very high value.
Okay. And then one of our guests is flying soon with their small dog and wonders if you had just some general tips about preparing to fly, a dog with, reducing anxiety with regard to flight. It seems as though the dog would be in the cabin with them. So I don't know if you have some just general tips on that.
Sure. So even being in the cabin, your dog still needs to get used to being inside the carrier. So I would make sure you're practicing place training, have your dog go in and out of that carrier, practice the sit and the down in the exercise, practice closing the door for this little, whatever, maybe it's a cloth carrier. And you could even let your dog have a small Kong inside that space if there's enough ventilation. But just make sure your puppy or your adult dog is used to going in and out of that and has experienced a high rate of reinforcement for staying in that space, because it's going to be challenging, being out at the airport and all of that. So all of that work you put in beforehand will definitely help your dog stay calm.
And what about if you have to travel and your dog is not able to stay in the cabin with you and they have to be crated in that cargo hold? Is there any general tips that you have there?
Yeah, definitely. You can use your crate, the crate that you plan to travel with. So get it in advance, maybe a few weeks if possible. Whatever time you have before you actually fly, use that as your crate for your dog, and give your dog the high value Kong once a day. And at the same time, at a lower volume, you can play the airplane engine noises at a very, very, this is like the white noise that you can get all kinds of recordings. I actually did this with my own dogs for about 4 weeks or so. So every day they go into the crate and you have this sound on in the background, but make sure it's very low volume so that they're not disturbed by it, and make sure your dog is still eating the Kong. And as they finish, you can open the door and let the dog out. Make sure you have bedding in the crate as well. And that'll help your dog to associate the crate with, oh, this is Kong time, and this is something that they enjoy going in there. And they've also heard the sound of the airplane engines at a very low volume, which helps for sure.
Okay. And then we had a couple of questions that are a little bit more specific, and probably we wouldn't get into these kinds of specifics on the call, but one of the questions I think can really be summed up. It seems like this person's dog really just does not care, to be alone, and does some destructive things if they're alone, if they're not in the crate. And in the crate doesn't care for it, chews on the bars, that sort of thing, and even does do, it looks like some kind of medication. What other resources if you have a dog who's exhibiting some more severe issues with separation anxiety, who might you tell someone to reach out to help with those things?
A certified professional dog trainer, you can go onto the CCPDT.org website, and these are certified professional dog trainers who are using up-to-date modern training methods. And when you contact somebody, do ask them if they have experience working with separation anxiety. Ideally, you want the person to come to your home so they can see the environment that your dog is in. Sometimes you can do online private training as well, and have some kind of a consultation that way. But it all depends on how mild or severe the symptoms are with your own dog.
Absolutely. And then we had another viewer who's adopted a rescue dog who seems like is very much attached to her, and basically, it sounds like when they leave, she just stays exactly where they were, stays near the bed where they were, and doesn't want to come out, to the point where pet sitters will go in and give them food. And she wants to know what, if anything, there is that she can do about that to let the dog come out when she's not home, or if this is okay. You know, and I'm sure, you know, warrants further discussion with more information.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if that means the dog, her dog is staying inside a room and not leaving that room, or is just sitting by the front door.
It seems like she stays in the bedroom near this, her owner's, it seems like her person's side of the bed, just stays there.
Well, if that's the area that your dog is comfortable in when you're not at home, and you put music on in that area, and there is a dog bed there as well, or even if it's your bed, and your dog is settling and not being destructive and not showing anything else, they just happen to want to stay in that space because they find it comforting, then that's okay. If the person is coming to take your dog for a walk and the dog won't leave the room, then I would look into that a little bit more, because you want the dog to be able to interact with other people if you want to avail of resources like that. And in that case, you can shoot us an email, or we also offer online private training consultations. And then you can also contact the CCPDT and have somebody come out and do a consultation for you.
Wonderful. It seems like there were a lot of questions on the crate, which I think you've gone into, a lot of questions on the high value chew and whether or not to leave it, which I think was really great. You went into all of those things. What other resources does spcaLA offer with regard to dog training?
Currently, we have online private training. We have group training classes, but they're not running yet, but they will be. And then we also will have private one-to-one training. We have our website with the tips from this presentation as well, but also other information on training. And then we have our marketplace, which is open, which is the pet store, and it sells supplies of pet food and treats and training tools. Yeah.
Wonderful. I think that we've gone through most of the questions that we had. Is there anything that you wanted to leave everybody with before we wrap things up?
Sure. So whatever situation you're in with your own dogs, just go gradually, and know that the time you're investing in teaching a few exercises, in particular the place training, having your dog voluntarily go into a crate or onto a bed, these are all really valuable. And if you only have 15 minutes a day, that's enough time to work with your dog. So yeah, that's my contribution.
That's wonderful. Well, I think this was really informative. I personally learned a lot about the things I'm going to do the next time I leave the house for my dog. So thank you.
You're welcome.
If anybody here has any further questions, you can email us at training@spcaLA.com, or just go to the website spcaLA.com for all of the resources that Sara mentioned just now. So I think with that, we can say goodbye to everybody, and this will be available online later.
Awesome. Thanks.
Right. Thank you, guys.